just starting out, Scott, wanted to get your take just on how I guess the year itself has kind of changed in terms of what you're able to do from an academic teaching standpoint, how you're interacting with students, particularly in that precision area.
Yeah, it's halfway through the semester we went to online courses, as most universities did. I'm going to say that the academic unit was positioned pretty well for that to occur. One of the things that we did this past year is the college that I'm in turned over IT to the university IT group. So the one thing about Ohio State is we have about 400 IT professionals that provide IT services to the central administration and lots of the university. Most of the colleges had done theirs traditionally on their own. It's one of the best decisions we ever made. And so from a technology perspective, we were in pretty good position. The other side of the coin, though, is, and what I'm going to say, a lot of people were using technology in the classroom. Nobody was really forced to go online totally, okay? Now, that had some very positive attributes. It also had some very significant downsides. As an academic unit, a lot of our courses have laboratories attached to them, okay? One of the other things that occurred in all this is, kind of in the middle of it, is Ohio State University decided to allow students a pass, non-pass option. And they had to make that decision. So it was, what I'm going to say, it was a mixed bag. Some students really rose to the occasion, did extremely well. There were others, though, in agriculture, a lot of our students already had jobs, and they just started their full-time jobs before the end of the semester. And, you can imagine springtime, a lot of companies are busy or whatever. And so for the students, that was very good. But again, it was kind of a mixed bag. I think what it's caused everybody to do at Ohio State is kind of reevaluate how we deliver instruction. We've been in the process of putting together a series of courses in what I'm going to characterize as digital agriculture. If anything, COVID-19 accelerated that, okay? And we've been doing a lot of instructional design. By the way, we were putting together courses that were credit as well as non-credit. In other words, they could be used and applied towards meeting degree requirements. The other thing is, we were also in a position where we wanted to provide certificates to people that may not be interested in degrees. And so we began rethinking quite a bit about who might be students at Ohio State in the future. And we've come out with a few things that I think are pretty important. But John Fulton, and John is on our faculty, and we got to talking about digital agriculture in a bit of a different sense than what we've traditionally thought about. We've always had a precision ag class. John's been teaching that. We know that precision livestock systems is coming on board, and so we need to have a course in that area, and we're planning for that. But one of the other things we got to thinking about is enterprise level. And so when you look at a lot of what's going on in the data space right now, the question really begs, who really understands that space, and how do you keep track of it? How do you keep up with it? There are so many mergers and acquisitions going on. I think this has been traditional in agriculture quite often, is when we see a downturn in the agricultural economy, there are going to be those companies that have the wherewithal and those that don't. But we've seen some of these companies go out and invest pretty heavily in technology. And my point is trying to, I know that you have a publication that you focus on that quite often, but just knowing who the players are and where the connections are anymore, that's about as important as anything. And so we're thinking about coursework that will try to keep people current in terms of some of the relationships that have been forged and some of the evolution of this data analytics enterprise portion of what's going on in agriculture. So we see that as very fertile ground. We begin seeing our students a bit different than your traditional high school graduate in some respects. And so the question is going to become, in some respects, is Ohio State going to be successful? Is Purdue going to be successful? Is Iowa State University going to be successful? I begin thinking about competition between universities in a bit of a different sense. I look at what Purdue has been doing online with their precision ag course, and that's pretty substantial. That's had pretty good uptake by industry. But we're also thinking there's a lot of subject matter out there that's not currently being addressed. We're moving towards prescriptive agriculture. And, we can talk about precision ag and we can lump prescriptive agriculture under that, but that's where this enterprise thing really becomes important. Knowing and understanding who's doing the analytics and trying to understand the rate of change of technology. And, I continue to think about genetic improvements. I keep thinking about crop protectants, but then this whole area of automation. I've been watching, as you probably well know, I've been watching very intently what's been going on. We had, as you're well aware, DOT was just purchased by Raven, and we go back and look at them picking up the company out of Iowa with the autonomous grain cart. I keep saying you got to be watching the company out of Australia and that Swarm Farm. The one that I've been paying a lot of attention to lately is Sabato. Okay? And, they're one of the first companies that's really kind of started down this track with automation and farming as a service. And so it's going to be interesting to see how successful they are. But when you look at what they're doing, it's been one of the things I've been advocating for, small equipment that's autonomous. And so we had a group of students this semester did a project on basically autonomous farming as a service, and they came up with a strategy where farmers would pay for performance. And for things like farming as a service, that takes on a whole new connotation in some respects. And so I look at some of the things that are going on right now with the automation. We have this pool of students and some really sharp individuals, and I'm beginning to think about how we engage students in kind of envisioning or re-envisioning what the business sector looks like as automation in agriculture continues to evolve or develop. And so in our capstone courses at Ohio State, we're beginning to turn towards entrepreneurship, both on the engineering side as well as our ag systems management courses. So we have traditional ag students and we have engineering students, but again, innovation continues to play a much bigger role in what we're doing because of some of the changes going on right now in production agriculture. So that's kind of a thumbnail sketch about the sort of things that we're doing and we're thinking about. And that's probably a little longer winded than you wanted. But,
Not at all. Not at all. No, I appreciate that. A couple of interesting points there, just follow-up questions. You mentioned kind of the field research and doing the autonomy as a service, and that farmers will be willing to pay for results. Can you talk a little bit more on that project and maybe a couple of things that were learned out of that?
Well, Ohio's coming off of 2019 planting season where a lot of people were late. Mm-hmm. Okay, and we know that farmers paid a pretty big price, but we also know there were a lot of farmers that mudded things in. So when I think about pay for performance, there's really two things that I think become very critical. Okay, what window did you get the crop planted in, and what was the stand? And what I'm saying is farmers can afford to pay for performance. And what I go back is, and I look at the size of equipment today, and this was really kind of brought home when I was in Brazil a couple of years back. John Fulton and I were down there, and I got to looking at one of the corn planters, and I looked at the Brazilian farmer, and I said, "You spaced your gauge wheels out 1.5 inches from the openers. Why'd you do that?" And he comes back, and again, speaking Portuguese, and my Portuguese is very limited, so the translator kind of cocks his head and looks at me and says, "Well, it's for the mud, silly." And so we got to talking a little bit, and they were harvesting soybeans. This is Mato Grosso region. They were harvesting soybeans, and they'd run the combines about 2.5 to 3 hours a day. And usually it rained every day, so they were done harvesting beans. The beans just got too wet. Well, they planted their corn right behind the soybeans. The corn was the second crop, and if they could get it in right away and take advantage of the rainfall, the precipitation, they'd get a good corn crop. So these guys were, I'll say, mudding it in. Well, I come back to the U.S. and I'm talking to everybody about this, and they're saying, well, those are totally different soils down there. Kind of like I'm beginning to think to myself, no, they're not totally different soils. I know the soils are different. But my point is how do we plant under less than favorable conditions? And today, I think the size of equipment limits us somewhat because of the gross vehicle weights and just being able to traffic the soils. I've also watched a lot of people in Ohio the last couple of years going to these ATV sprayers. You know, a couple of those you can cover the same amount of ground that you can with a high clearance sprayer, and obviously there's not near the capital cost, but the other side of the coin is you got a lot better flotation you can get over the ground. And so I'm beginning to rethink in some respects over the last couple of years. By the way, this year, springtime, Southwest Ohio, we're not quite back in the shape we were last year, but not a lot has been planted around here yet. Whereas I look at our what's going on in Iowa and Illinois, and they have substantial portions of their crop in. And so I'm beginning to rethink in some respects how we manage under some of these conditions. And again, lighter, and I've been advocating smaller, lighter equipment may be one of the solutions. And so the other thing, and I'm going to give Elizabeth Hawkins and John Fulton a lot of credit, our eFields project has been met with a lot of very positive response from the farmers in the state of Ohio. But I think what's more important is we're beginning to see a lot more of our Ohio farmers engage in on-farm research. And so, you know, the farmers have a lot of technology out there. Well, can we give them the investigative tools so that they can begin answering some of their own questions? One of the things that we've seen in this is seeding rates in soybeans. You know, we had a lot of people seeding at 160,000. Well, we're continuing to show in the state of Ohio year after year that probably seeding rates of 120,000 are more cost effective. We had one farmer this year that planted 40,000 plants per acre. Okay, and that would have been unheard of last year, but last year he was down at 80,000, and he still made money at 80,000. And so he's asking himself, how low can I go? Now, we also have to consider the cropping season, but those are the sort of things that I think are beginning to change now that farmers have a lot of tools that they can use. And again, if we give them some fundamental experimental designs that they can implement easily and then draw meaningful conclusions in terms of statistics, I think that's a pretty big important item. So we're beginning to think about with these eFields reports how we can put that data in a database and begin allowing farmers to query the database and ask specific questions. And you know, once we get to enough of these investigations, and in the case of maybe other states joining us in a similar effort, it can become a very interesting situation. Again, looking at the data and beginning to think about how we utilize that data to answer some of these questions.
Yeah. Well, no, and that's you make some good points in there about you know, some of the examples, and you're right. I mean, just the comparisons that you can draw from what we're seeing in other areas, and I know, like you said, you've been a big advocate of kind of the size versus efficiency argument with equipment and some of the opportunities there, which again, you know, we're moving towards. I had a chance to have an autonomy conversation last week with one of the leaders in Raven Autonomy and talking about kind of what they're doing as far as you know, getting that technology out both into dealerships and in demonstrations, and I've kind of modified a little bit of what they're doing, particularly this year, but some of the advancements they're making. One of the other questions is going back to a couple of comments you made earlier with regards to the online learning opportunities. And I wanted to get your take on this, because talking with some dealerships about whether it's summer internships or new hires that are coming on, graduates from this spring, they did make note of the fact that you know, it's allowed them in some cases to come in to the dealership a little bit earlier, or kind of mix whatever they're doing, wrapping up the school year versus coming in to start to get that hands-on experience. What have you seen at the university level as far as students that maybe have some of that in-field hands-on learning that maybe hasn't been as available? I know when we connected, you mentioned last week that you guys are starting to get back into the field, but how have you seen that adjustment been made?
Part of the problem in terms of structured settings for students is if you're going to do a lab, especially in the springtime, the question is the weather going to cooperate? And we have schedules that we have to think about at the beginning of the semester in terms of this 14 or 15 week long semester. And if the moon and planets are in alignment, everything's good. You go to the field and students get good experience. The other side of the coin, though, is and this year's a perfect year. Second half of the semester, we're not in class, so we had no laboratories, and so we're beginning to think about how we get students that hands-on experience. One of the things we've been trying to do is replicate a lot of equipment so you can get a lot of, butts in seats are important in terms of really understanding the technology. But I'm also beginning to think about how we can use some of these online tools to do a much better job of training students up front, okay? There are some things we can simulate in a classroom setting, but again, there's nothing that really substitutes for students actually being out there and doing that. You kind of started down the road on this. We had a lot of students that left early. They were trying to finish online. But I keep thinking in some respects when you look at opportunities for these students to learn, whether they're doing internships, whether they're doing co-op experiences, if we could structure the academic year around the production year, that might be kind of interesting. In other words, middle of the summer, they ought to be online taking some classes where there's not quite as much to do. Springtime, though, they ought to be out in the field and getting that hands-on experience, and again, in the fall at harvest time. And so there might be some creative ways that we can kind of rethink the curriculum in terms of allowing the right students to self-pace in some respects, and then be out there getting this work experience as well. I think one of the things we're learning is in the future, Ohio State University students may not need to be at the university for all 4 years. There's going to be some things, and I point to chemistry labs. It's kind of hard to do a chemistry lab at home. Okay? There's just no good way to make that happen. On the other hand, there are a lot of things that students can do at home and then come to campus then for the important hands-on experiences. And so, we keep talking about hybrid courses, part of it in person, part of it online. I think the hybrid approach is going to be the thing that really kind of wins out in the future. In other words, the student won't have to spend all 4 years on campus, but they're going to spend part of their time on campus. And it's going to be a different type of experience for those students when they do come to campus. So.
Well, Scott, I appreciate it. Like I said, I didn't want to take up too much of your time here this morning. I just wanted to get a few thoughts and capture some perspective. So I appreciate it. Thanks for weighing in on a couple of different subjects. I feel like we covered a lot of ground here in a short amount of time, but I'd expect nothing less.
Well, if you got any questions or anything comes up, don't hesitate to let me know. While there's a downturn in agriculture right now in terms of the financial side of things, I still look at how technology is changing things. And I'm going to be the first person to admit that farmers may not be able to invest quite like they were in the past in technology. But the other side of the coin is these technological developments continue at a very rapid pace. And I think that's going to be for the foreseeable future. In other words, farmers are going to have a lot more choices, and I think it's going to be more important for academic institutions to help put farmers in a position of choosing the right technologies for their operations. And so we for a while, we got to talking about extension, the relevance of extension. I think it's going to be more important today than it's ever been. And I'm not saying that universities should be watchdogs, But what I am saying is universities should be working with farmers to get them to ask the right questions, with the understanding that not every technology is going to benefit all producers the same. And it's going to come down to the local situations, and the farmers really need to adopt the technologies that are best suited for their operation, their equipment complement, if you will, and even the skill levels of the people that are working for those individuals. And so I also see this farming as a service becoming much more important in the future. And farmers may not give up all of their production practices, but I think increasingly it's going to make sense for them to pay for the right technologies at the right times of the year. So,
Perfect. So I had one last question for you, Scott. Just this is kind of separate, but we're with the publication here, we're putting together, kind of still researching and content gathering on this, but we wanted to develop a kind of a career guide of sorts for students or graduates that are just getting into the precision ag field, particularly kind of focused more at those people that are entering or within kind of a dealership setting. And, talking with a lot of dealers and having some of those initial conversations, certainly there's the on-the-job training, and every dealership kind of has their structure with new hires or when they're looking to bring in new hires and find people. But we've had some good feedback just on the fact that, this seems like there could be some value, in this as a resource. And the idea is to provide kind of that bridge knowledge for, what students or graduates can expect, in a dealership setting. And, what's that first year going to look like? What's the training? What's the onboarding? What's the culture like? So again, kind of designing it as something that we would view as kind of an annual thing that we would, put out and modify. Certain things would be, probably more evergreen than others, but, there's certainly changes to kind of some of the procedural and planning stuff. But I guess I wanted to get your thought if you think, from a student standpoint, academically, if there's some value in that, or if there's some need for something like that, that bridges kind of the classroom learning to the infield to actually kind of that job or internship, what these students or new graduates can expect.
I think you're 100% correct, and one of the things that I will add to that, as we see what's happening with dealerships, it used to be that students went to work for dealerships. We'll go back 20 or 30 years ago. Family-owned businesses, there wasn't necessarily a lot of upward mobility. But today, that's all changing. And so again, it's a different climate. And in fact, I would even go one step further and say, for the people that are working for dealerships right now, how do they remain current? And how do they progress through these organizations? Because again, with the merger of a lot of these dealerships, there's a lot more upward mobility in some of these dealerships. And so I would encourage you to think about the people that are already in the dealerships too. And I think we want to be careful, because we've always, higher education institutions have always focused on, we're going to award a degree at the end of whatever this experience is, a BS, a MS, whatever the case may be. I think academia has to rethink what we're doing in some respects. In other words, the end result, the end goal may not be a degree for a lot of people. Maybe it's for some people that have been in the industry for a while and they want to retool because there's new opportunities coming. And so let's not close the door on those individuals either. I think we're going to get to the point where certainly Ohio State's awarding credentials, just like Purdue and anybody else. But I think those credentials could be something other than the BS degree or the MS degree as well. So.
Mm-hmm. Perfect. No, I appreciate the feedback on that. Like I said, we're starting to try to pull the pieces together, and I wanted to talk to a few folks at the university level just to see, if they think if this is a resource, students would be interested in, if there's some, value there, and in those particularly that are geared toward that, or maybe just don't know. Maybe they're like, oh, okay, well, this is a good primer on what this type of career could potentially look like. And like I said, that's our core audience here is that dealership precision business. So thinking about how can we connect the dots a little bit better here with some sort of a resource that we're prepared. But you make a good point about, obviously, the advancement and the development side. That's a huge part of existing employees and where they get to go beyond being hired now. And there's a lot more emphasis on that now. And people coming in are looking for those advancement opportunities and not necessarily content to be hired as a specialist and be a specialist for 10 or 15 years. So.
Right.
Good. Well, great. Well, Scott, always a pleasure. Appreciate your time. It's good to see you. Glad things are going well. And like I said, hopefully next time we talk, we're we're not both stuck at home here still, but I appreciate the time as always.
Hey, it's it's not the best situation to be in necessarily because of COVID-19, but on the other hand, it's caused me to rethink a lot about universities and a lot about our daily work lives as well. So it hasn't been all bad.
That's right. That's true. There are benefits. I'll agree. So, well, great. Well, Scott, take care. Talk to you later.